Today's case is a crazy story from Quebec, Canada that we're surprised that it was never covered in the US. The Canadian media dubbed the murder of 19-year-old Remi La'Haie the Rambo murder because his neighbors hired mercenaries to get rid of him. The reason? It was all because of the teenager's loud car. And that's not even the craziest part of the story. Neighbors from Hell, the Quebec Rambo murder. We tried our best with the pronunciation, please bear with us. Not enough good fences to make a good neighbor. In the small island town of L'Île-et-Perrot in 1987, Remi La'Haie was a 19-year-old factory worker who lived with his mother Angèle and his sister Natalie. He was popular with his friends and got along with just about everyone. Things were also going great with his new girlfriend. All in all, life was pretty good for the teen. But Remi had one true love in his life. His red, souped-up 1976 Pontiac LeMans. That car was his baby, and he spared almost no expense getting it upgraded. This included a remounted rear suspension and a modified engine to get more horsepower. And with more horsepower meant more noise, and Remi loved racing up and down his street. We at the Twin Files have to endure loud cars and motorcycles outside of our window while we record, so we know exactly how annoying squealing tires can be. But for Remi's neighbors across the street, they weren't just annoyed, they were furious. 40-year-old Nicole Laurin was fed up. Night after night, day after day, she had to listen to Remi's screeching tires as he and his friends, with cars just as loud, drove up and down the street. When Remi wasn't racing, he was loudly revving up his engine. Nicole and her 45-year-old husband, Michel, complained to Remi constantly about the noise. Eventually, their 21-year-old son Daniel tried to get Remi to stop, but Remi will always ignore their complaints. The noise from Remi's high-performance muscle car had become so stressful for Michel that he began taking medication to calm his nerves. Naturally, most people would either call code enforcement or make a noise complaint with the police to deal with such a rude and noisy neighbor. But no, that's not what Nicole did. She was so mad that she hired a hitman. Nicole, along with her husband and son, plotted to get rid of their noisy neighbor across the street for good. Michel remembered that his mother-in-law was neighbors with someone that worked at a paramilitary training school. So, he decided to make a call. Sometime in July 1987, Michel spoke with 24-year-old Jean-Claude Legault. Jean-Claude was a co-owner of Mecca Survival Center in Rigaud, Quebec. Michel asked Jean-Claude if he could teach Remi a lesson, but before Jean-Claude could confirm the plan, he said that he had to run it by his commander, 33-year-old David White. Michel borrowed $1,000 from Nicole, and a few nights later, he met with Jean-Claude and David. David agreed to take the job, and Michel paid David with a promise of paying the remaining $800 when the job was complete. Wannabe Rambos. Jean-Claude Theo Legault and David Lobo White were obsessed with the Rambo persona. Their office was filled with various combat knives, guns, other weapons, and Soldier of Fortune magazines. Jean-Claude, son of a retired police officer, bragged constantly about how well known he was in mercenary circles across the United States. He also claimed that he served 3 years as an infantryman in the Canadian Forces. We were unable to verify his military record. The pair trained in different mercenary schools in the United States before opening up their own commando school in Quebec in August 1986. David christened himself commanding officer of the school, and Jean-Claude was his non-commissioned officer in charge of training. Their school charged $175 Canadian for a 2-week course where students would be given combat fatigues and camped out in the woods. There, students were trained in such skills as ambush and counter-ambush techniques, guerrilla warfare, hand-to-hand combat, survivalist skills, planting booby traps, demolition, and small arms use with live ammunition. And while the school was popular when it initially opened, interest failed quickly and the school didn't get much business. Now you may be wondering why there are paramilitary groups in Quebec. Well, Quebec actually has had several separatist groups since the 1950s that want Quebec to separate from Canada and be its own country. There were even several attacks by these separatist groups, and a group called Front de Libération even kidnapped a British diplomat and a Canadian labor minister. Because of that history, David and Jean-Claude had once said in an interview that they did not train separatists and kept pictures and contact information in their records to give to the police if necessary. Remi's last night. August 18, 1987 was a typical day for Remi. He mowed the lawn for his mom and spent his day with his girlfriend and sister. He then spent some time with his best friend Pierre at Pierre's job at a video rental store. Since the store was closing at 10:30, Pierre invited Remi to go get some food. Remi declined and said that he had to get some sleep because he had work in the morning. When he got home, Remi's sister saw him talking to someone from their backyard around 11 that night. She called out to him and he said that he'd come inside in a few minutes. And that was the last time anyone saw Remi alive. What Remi's family didn't know was that Remi was talking to Jean-Claude. Surprisingly, Jean-Claude and Remi were casual acquaintances, and Jean-Claude was able to use that to lure Remi into the vacant lot near his home. Jean-Claude told Remi that he had some commando weapons to show off, and Remi agreed to take a look. After Remi looked over the weapons that included a shotgun, a knife, and a garrote, the two had a quick chat and shook hands. As Remi turned around to go back home, Jean-Claude shot the 19-year-old in the back. Remi tried to get up, but Jean-Claude continued the attack with the same weapons he showed Remi only moments earlier, plunging the knife into Remi 14 times. When he was done, he dragged Remi's body and left it under a tree. Jean-Claude casually walked from the lot and down the street, where he was picked up by David as if nothing happened. The next day, as a police officer was doing his daily patrol, he saw legs sticking from behind a tree. He pulled over and found Remi's bloody body laying on his back only 400 feet from his house. Remi wasn't home by the time his mother, Angèle, woke up. She didn't think anything of it because her son had to work that morning. But when she stepped outside and saw her son's car still in the driveway, she became worried. Her worry grew when she saw the police and crowd surrounding the empty lot near her home. The pit in her stomach grew as she walked closer to the scene. The officers saw her and tried to stop her from getting too close to the police tape. Even though she didn't see his face, she recognized her son's clothes. It was Angèle's only son lying lifeless on the ground. She collapsed and burst into tears. Nathalie was quick to find her mother and tried to comfort her as best she could. And as she asked loudly who could have done this to her boy, Nicole Laurin walked up to Angèle and comforted her. Somebody is about to crack. Satisfied with the outcome, the Laurins paid Jean-Claude the rest of the money, and they went on with their lives, getting away with the perfect crime. Or did they? While Nicole and her son Daniel got the peace and quiet they wanted, Michel's guilt was gnawing at his conscience. This overwhelming guilt caused Michel to suffer from his severe anxiety attacks and hallucinations of Remi, and that made Nicole and Daniel nervous. There was no telling when Michel would crack, and so Nicole and Daniel told Jean-Claude and David that Michel's mental state was declining and they were worried that he'd suffer a nervous breakdown and confess to the police. As the saying goes, snitches get stitches, but in this case, they get poisoned. In a twist that seems like it came straight out of a movie, Michel's wife and oldest son decided that Michel was a weak link and he had to go. The mercenaries and the two Laurins hatched a plan to slowly poison Michel because a slow poisoning wouldn't be suspicious as a violent death. Nicole paid Jean-Claude and David $5,000 for poison. The homemade brew was made with poisonous plants that David and Jean-Claude made themselves. The Wannabe Rambos gave Nicole the poison, and the next day, she slipped it into her husband's coffee. After a few sips, he began to feel ill and his stomach became bloated and hard. Michel rushed himself to the hospital where the doctors told him that he'd been poisoned. When the police went to the hospital to investigate the poisoning, Michel confessed everything. The aftermath. On January 24, 1988, Nicole, Michel, and Daniel Laurin, Jean-Claude Legault, and David White were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Jean-Claude and David lived together, and when the police searched their home, they found dozens of weapons, notes about the killing, and a recipe book that the pair used to make the poison. The arrest shocked Remi's hometown. Neighbors told reporters after the fact how the Laurins tried to comfort the family and told Remi's mother that everything was going to be okay days after the murder. In another bizarre twist, it came to light that Remi was planning to sell his car. By the time the five were arrested, Remi's mother and little sister were no longer living in the neighborhood. Angèle said that there were too many memories in that house, and she and Nathalie couldn't bear to live in there without Remi. In March of that year, the Laurins' charges were downgraded to manslaughter, which they pleaded guilty to. So why were the charges downgraded? Well, it's because they claimed that they didn't want Remi to actually die. Apparently, the family only wanted Remi's legs and arms to be broken so he couldn't drive his car anymore. When it came to the Wannabe Rambos, David pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder. Jean-Claude felt betrayed, and so he testified against David and was upset that David pleaded not guilty while he pleaded guilty. He said that David was his best friend and commanding officer, and that when an officer gives you an order, he is just as guilty as the soldier that carries it out. Jean-Claude testified that David was supposed to join in on the hit, but chickened out last minute. He also testified that Michel Laurin's request to hurt Remi wasn't his first. 3 years prior, when Remi was just 16, Michel told Jean-Claude that he wanted Remi crippled. Jean-Claude pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was given life in prison, and David White was convicted of first-degree murder and given life. As far as the Laurins go, Michel received 11 years, Nicole received 10 years and 4 months, and their son Daniel received 8 years and 4 months. But let's not forget about the poisoning. Nicole and Daniel pled guilty for attempted murder of Michel. Nicole received 2 years in prison to run concurrently with her 10-year sentence, and her son Daniel received 20 months to run concurrently with his 8-year sentence. Michel said that he forgave his wife and son and had reconciled with them. Today, the family is out of prison, and it seems like they've kept themselves out of trouble because we can't find any further information about them. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Twin Files. Don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps us out. So, from a scale from calling the police to hiring a hitman, how would you deal with a bad neighbor? Let us know in the comments.